Hello, this is the RPG Crawler, and it's time once again for Shelf of Many Things, where I take a look at various indie and small press tabletop RPG systems and accessories. Now, a while back in one of my videos, I had mentioned that I was looking for solo RPG systems that might bear certain similarities to sort of a tabletop roguelike system, basically a complete, easy-to-run, randomly generated dungeon crawler. I was recommended a few of them, and I picked one of them and tried it out, and it actually ended up taking quite a bit of my time. Four Against Darkness by Andrea Svilagoy. I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. It's from Ganesh Games. As I said, probably mispronouncing that as well. This is a simplified solitaire dungeon crawling focused RPG that can be used either in a solo play or as a rules light full party system in a pinch. It's available in both a printed version and a PDF, and it should be noted that there's an expansion, Four Against the Abyss, and standalone adventures as well that utilize the system. This review will concentrate only on the core book, however. I might take a look at Four Against the Abyss at a later date. Four Against Darkness is an extremely rules light type of system. The book consists of only 90 pages of rules and requires only D6s and some writing material, including some grid paper. It's designed to be used solo, as I said as well. It can also be used for two or multiple people playing a group, although the general focus is on the raw mechanics of dungeon crawling, and that may make other systems a bit better for actual role-playing. Still, it's robust enough to be used as a pretty good standalone system in and of itself. Physically, the book has a full-color softcover with art by the author, and it's a pretty decently durable black and white interior layout. You get a general art like that on the interior with a 2-column spread for most of them, interspersed with tables where they are necessary. This is kind of interesting because it looks like it's a create space style print-on-demand format, but it's still durable enough to used pretty heavily, and that's important because even casual use is going to constantly reference the interior for randomized tables throughout. You know, I gotta be honest, a lot of the layout of this thing really does evoke the old school tabletop games from the 80s, and I've got a couple of them, like especially like old versions of Tunnels and Trolls. I don't know why I was pointing over there. I got my Tunnels and Trolls stuff taken down. Oh yeah, I still got it there. Anyway, a lot of it's like, it really evokes the old school stuff. Not necessarily even the 90s stuff, but stuff from before that. Now, the PDF, on the other hand, it's reasonably well bookmarked and pretty easy to navigate, which is also important if you're going to be using it for quick reference during play. Now, as typical for rules light systems I review here, I'm going to keep exact examination of the system itself, as well as the gameplay elements thereof, a little bit more vague than usual, just to keep from giving the whole system away, which can easily be done accidentally with rules this brief. I will say, however, that there's a bit of a saving grace in terms of value with this book, because a fair amount of the contents are actually just the tables that you used to randomize the dungeon and the contents within. And I really can't I can't do more than gloss over those anyway, just because, that would just be reading out of the book. Alright, one final mention that I will make before we get into the actual review is that the system does appear to have been revised a few times. This particular book that I have lists it as version 4.0. Due to the nature of PDFs and print-on-demand services, future versions may differ slightly from what I'm about to say, but it seems that the underlying system itself is pretty stable, as I did take a look at an older version that I basically borrowed from somebody else. So let's all delve into the contents. It starts with a basic introduction and overview of important rules, including an overall estimate of the length of a session, which ranges from about 45 minutes to an hour. After having played it several times, I can vouch for it. It's going to give or take that long for a single session from start to finish. However, due to the randomization involved, some dungeon crawls may take a lot longer or a lot less time to go through. There's this idea that monsters or NPCs don't roll any dice, only the players do. So it's kind of one of those one-sided test systems, and there's a couple other games that do that too, so it's not really that odd. All die rolls in the basic rules involve a check from the character side of things. Just if you're going to attack, you roll against the character's attack. If you are going to get attacked, then you roll against the character's defense. Monsters don't roll anything. Now, there are the usual list of dice codes, although since everything in the core rules uses d6s, it mostly introduces the idea of adding the character's level or half their level to a roll, which is one of the core mechanics of the game, depending on what roll you're looking at. Along with the idea that d6s explode, that is, that they add and re-roll on a 6. Then there's several pages of creating the party. Now the game is balanced for a party of 4 characters, so you select 4 character archetypes to start with from a list based on the classics of dungeon crawling. There's the warrior, cleric, rogue, and wizard, but there's also the barbarian, elf, dwarf, and halfling. There's no attributes beyond life and character special abilities and equipment. However, some classes offer a basic choice in starting equipment that can serve to differentiate them, and it doesn't seem to be any sort of limit on how many of each class you can have. So if you wanted to go dungeon crawling with nothing but 4 wizards, hey, more power to you. The equipment section follows, including rules for buying and selling equipment, especially after you've been to the dungeon once or twice. It's about what you would expect for a rules-light old-school dungeon crawl-focused system, except that weapons are made pretty generic, just basically falling into categories of light, hand weapon, and two-handed weapon, then the various ranged weapons. And then the player just marks down whether a particular weapon they bought is crushing or slashing. Armor is handled in a similar manner, with just basic categories like light and heavy. Of note is that basic gear actually has rules attached to every little thing and is listed in the gear's description, since the solo rules have to constrain options to fit in with what the basic engine can handle. Rules for attacking monsters and handling encounters follow. Only bosses have life points per se, while minions and vermins don't. Rather, an entire group of minions is whittled down during a successful attack based on their level versus the attacking character's dice roll. Indeed, level is the only real attribute that most monsters have, and it defines their overall effectiveness, although most monsters also have some sort of secondary notation on what they can or cannot do in a fight. Encounter rules include a whole gamut of reactions that a character can have besides fighting as well, which can open the doors to dealing with them in ways other than simply charging in and engaging. I think it's not only a nice touch, but an important one, since 4 Against Darkness does share certain old-school deadliness ratings, and deciding which fights to actively engage in can be an important strategic move. Charts on generating the dungeon room by room follow, including each room's contents. You're expected to generate each section on the fly, and this does require graph paper to do. You can be as detailed or not in these notes as you wish, but I actually found it very useful to save the maps that I generate during a game, then use them in other tabletop games, since they do end up being pretty neat little dungeons. Your mileage may vary, of course. The paper itself serves to constrain the size of the dungeon, since each room you generate can only be rotated so much, and it's just presumed that if you go to the edge of the paper, then that area is a dead end. The reliance on d6s alone means that there's only so many room combinations, treasure types, and even monster encounters that can be fit in the various tables. However, I found that they ran the gamut of encounter types fairly well, at least for a generic dungeon crawl style game. Monster entries on these tables do include reaction tables as well, which means that each monster you encounter will have its own general temperament. Rules for running and concluding the dungeon follow, including wandering monsters, retracing your steps through the dungeon, and determining a final boss. The dungeon isn't considered beaten until you come across the final boss, which has additional treasure, but the final boss is generated from the lesser bosses you encounter rather than in a set area, simply based on how many bosses you've already fought. There's a special case in that final room that you generate in a dungeon will have the final boss in it if you haven't encountered it already. So if you run out of paper, there's not an instance where you just don't have a final boss. Leaving the dungeon before you encounter the final boss is an option as well, although the game doesn't really generally technically support heading back in afterwards. Now, it's a solo game, so there's no one really stopping you from just reusing the map and generating new encounters. I won't tell if you don't. That having been said, the characters can die or get turned to stone, and carrying them back to the entrance to put them outside before heading back in is allowed, and can provide an interesting twist to an adventure as a whole as you try to drag your fallen companions back to be restored later. Leveling up is not done by tracking experience, but rather simply tracking encounters and rolling dice. Vermin don't count towards any level up, while for every 10 minion encounters that you make a roll to see if one of your characters levels up. Just one of them. Every single boss encounter offers this level up roll as well, and final bosses and certain types of other bosses offer too. You can't level up one character twice in a row, and as you level up, the actual chance of your character succeeding in the level up roll decreases, which means that as you approach level 5, which is the cap for this particular book, the max supported in the core rules at least, you will naturally take longer and longer to level up, unless you're very lucky. Leveling up simply increases your life points by 1, but also increases your level rating by 1, and since so many roles rely on that just to display how well you're doing, that actually makes a huge difference. There are a very basic number of spells, basically just enough to provide your dungeon crawling operations with their most common denominator stuff, and clerics really don't have their own spell list. Clerics simply get special abilities that might otherwise mimic cleric spells, and then actual spells are left for magic users, that is, wizards and elves. Now, there are other rules for encounters listed after the spell list, and since the majority of them affect combat, I honestly am not sure why they didn't just put this in the combat section as well. I'll get onto the organization of the book later. Rules for searching rooms can provide for more chances to discover secret doors, treasure, and offer the potential to uncover clues. Now, clues are a sort of meta resource in this game, and if you get enough of them, you get a chance to receive either the location of a treasure, a unique ability, or a permanent bonus to a particular character, chosen by the player when it happens. In my opinion, it's a neat little way to further personalize any particular character in a group. There are rules for basic traps that you encounter, and optional rules for locked doors. And this can make a particular run more difficult simply by moving them in, but it can increase the value of the rogue class. And it can be more useful in a group if you're using this as basics of a proper RPG session. The section that follows includes some summaries of rules that people often overlook, but that were mentioned prior, a way to expand the game into a proper group-based RPG light engine, which mostly consists of offering advice on how to resolve non-combat situations, and then a very useful frequently asked questions section. The final several pages include things like suggested map symbols, sample character sheets, quick reference charts, and most of the relevant tables that were distributed throughout the book prior. Now, unlike a lot of things that I review here on Shelf of Many Things, where I only get maybe a couple sample play sessions in before the review just to see how the system works and stacks up, I actually ended up playing 4 Against the Darkness a fair amount, usually while waiting for other things to do things like rendering or when I'm away from the computer entirely. The relatively compact book, the reliance on only 2 dice, the ability to play it with just a pencil and a notebook of graph paper means it's actually quite portable, about as portable as any gamebook-style adventure. And the fact that there are now a number of gamebook-style adventures for the system only supports that. The games that I've run with it have tended to follow the same sort of course that an old-school dungeon crawl using an older edition tabletop game might work as, and while some may find that a bit difficult, I found it endearing. It managed to capture the feel of those older editions, but with far less prep work and materials, albeit with a little bit of a more limited option set. I'm not sure if I'd recommend it for a rules light group, so long as other options like swords and wizardry continue light are around, but it would do the job just fine, and might be friendlier to ease people who aren't really into RPGs into this hobby just as a basic introduction, in much the same way that a board game like Dungeon or Hero Quest might. I do have some minor issues, though. You may have noticed this. The organization in terms of the rules is a little iffy at times. For the majority of simple play, the rules are pretty much right in line, but if you start doing anything a little bit off script, you'll have to flip through the book over and over again to find a rules reference. For instance, some wandering monster encounters may result in a different flow of actions than the usual combat, And in at least one case, I just knew a rule existed, specifically the one for unarmed attack rolls, but I couldn't find it because I'd sworn that in my cover-to-cover read-through, I could have sworn that I saw that rule, noted that it was not in an area where I would have thought it would be, and then continued onward. And then during one of my play sessions, some gremlins appeared. I rolled up gremlins on the table. They stole all my party's weapons, and I had to choose whether to scrap the mission or continue with just my fists. And I went back to look for the particular rules, and either I'm blind, they may not be in here after all, or I just couldn't find I couldn't find it. I just still couldn't find it to this point. So I just ended up winging it at the time. But aside from a few quirks like that and a little bit of requirement to flip back and forth, I really do like the system. I really do like 4 Against Darkness. It seems to capture quite a bit of what I was looking for in a solo RPG. Not everything, granted, not everything, but enough to have quite a bit of fun with it. I'll have to pick up the expansion and see if it does a good job in raising the level cap. I have absolutely no qualms about recommending it if you're looking for that sort of thing. There are solo RPG rules that fit on top of another more robust system out there, like the old D&D systems, and there are other rules light systems that offer slightly more options if you're just looking for a rules light book. But in a balance of usability, completeness for the genre it's aiming for, and portability, it's a pretty solid little product. I'll leave links to where you can get the PDF and the print versions in the description below. This has been the RPG Crawler with Shelf of Many Things, 4 Against Darkness. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment if you've got any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content, both tabletop and computer. If you're feeling particularly generous, I do have a Patreon at patreon.com/RPGcrawler that goes towards supporting content by allowing me to buy equipment and basically buy stuff to review when it's not given to me. Anyway, until next time, take care and goodbye.